Hi, everybody. This is Blaine DeSantis, and I welcome you to another edition of Books and Looks. Yes, it's my weekly voyage of discovery in the wonderful world of books. Of books I've read and authors I've interviewed. And today we're going to Turkey. That's correct. I'm interviewing the author D.J. Green. Now, Deb is was a practicing geologist. And so she's written a wonderful novel called No More Empty Spaces. It's a novel about geology. It's a book about love, romance, what goes on in the world, culture. I learned so much listening and reading this book. I listened to her. She even gives us some visualization of tectonic plates and everything. It's a wonderful, wonderful interview and a great, great book. We're going to learn about that. We're going to learn about a cultural site called Nemrut Dai. Okay. And I'm probably not pronouncing that properly, but we're going to put a link to that for you. I want you to look at that. These are carvings. They're over almost 2,000 years old, and they're beautiful carvings on the top of a 10,000-foot mountain. Imagine the carvings got up there, the workforce is there. A lot of culture about Turkey we find out about in this book, as along with the geology, the faults that are out there, that's causing all those earthquakes that we read about almost each and every year. They're having major earthquakes. So we touch about this. We touch about what geologists have to go through, and then the situation with the family, because it's very difficult, because that geologist is over there for 3 years. So, this can be quite uprooting of a family. So I think you're going to really, really enjoy this. This is a great book. I love the book. I think you're going to really enjoy this interview. So I'm just going to be quiet. I'm going to let you follow along as I talk with DJ Deb Green. Deb, welcome to Books and Looks.
Thank you, Blaine. It's wonderful to be here.
I'm very happy to have you on. Another geologist comes on. I'm very, very happy with this. And before we get started, a little background. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to college and grad school? Let's learn a little bit about Deb Green.
Yeah, so I was born in Queens, New York, and grew up there and on Staten Island. I went to college in upstate New York at the University of Rochester. And after a really severe winter in my senior year, I decided to warm up a little bit, plus go to a great program at the Center for Engineering Geology at Texas A&M University, where I got my master's. And then I lived in North Carolina for many years, but during that time, I I worked in probably 20 to 30 states as a geologist, working on field jobs. Geologists don't just stay behind their desk.
So it's a very hands-on or foots on the ground type profession.
For field geologists, it certainly is.
Okay. Wow. All right. Did you always want to be a geologist? I mean, did you like rocks and things growing up?
I Yes, and I always loved natural science, and I was probably kind of a strange little kid. When people asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would say I'm going to get a PhD in ornithology, which got me a lot of really odd looks from adults when I was about 6. But my father was an earth science teacher, and we got to camp all summer long, and he explained the geology. So I took Geology 101 my freshman year, first semester, fell in love with it and never looked back.
Now, when you said you went out and went camping with your dad, did you go out west, or did you stay on the East Coast when you did your camping?
It was our whole family, and we would leave the day after school ended, and we actually hit all 50 states and many, many of the Canadian provinces. So it would just depend upon the summer. We'd have an idea of what our farthest destination would be, and we'd try and get to that about the middle of the summer. And it was, I think, the greatest gift my parents gave me. I feel like I grew up in the national parks.
That's wonder. I love the national parks. Absolutely loved what you did. I couldn't camp. I'm not a camper, but I mean, I love that you went out and, with your family, and you had great experiences. And what was the last state you got to, if you can remember? You had to do 50 state. What was the last
The
one you did?
last state I got to was Rhode Island.
Oh my word, almost next door. Oh my, from growing up in New
Our
York.
our joke was it was so small we just missed it, so
I got 5 more to go, so I don't know if I'm gonna make them, but with the middle of the country is just difficult for me. You know, that Iowa, Nebraska. I was in South Dakota, but not North Dakota. I gotta get to Idaho, so I didn't get to Kansas either. So those are my states I gotta get to, but, I'm glad you had that great experience. You said you had siblings, I think you mentioned. Did they get into
I have one.
geology? Did she get into this field also?
No, actually, I have one sister, and both my parents and my sister are teachers. They were teachers. So yeah, I'm the only one in my family who's not an educator.
All right. Well, that's okay. Now, again, you're another female geologist I have interviewed. Uh, I always thought, and I was told this is pretty much a male dominated field. Was that how it was when you were going to school? Was it still very male dominated back then?
Absolutely, although in school the percentages were not as severe when I went into the workforce, women were about between 10 and 20% of the geology workforce. And now, women are represent over 40% of the geology workforce. So the numbers have gotten better, but it is definitely has been and still is a male dominated field.
Yeah, and I don't want you to get into any specifics, but when you got out of school, you went in to go work as a geologist, did you find any discrimination in the hiring practices because you were a female and the field was so overwhelmingly male dominated?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it still goes on. But and I will give you actually one specific example. Even though it was illegal to do so at the time, one interviewer asked me if I planned to have children. And, it was illegal for him to ask that. But I, as it turned out, I sort of skirted the question, but it certainly made it easy for me not to want to go work for that company.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. Wow. Now, you were both a practicing geologist in the sense that you were working for a company, but then I also read that you were a consultant. Now, how long did you work for a specific company, and then how long did you do consulting?
I worked for a very large engineering consulting firm for the first 6 years of my career, and then I worked for industry, where I was a project manager managing consultants for the many soil and groundwater investigations that were being done. And then, my late husband and I started a consulting practice together, and I did that, for more than 20 years.
Oh, okay. That's great. And I'm assuming it took you all over.
Yes, the last time I updated my geological resume, I think I figured out that I'd worked in 35 states.
Wow. That's something. Well, now, uh, did you ever get to Turkey? Because this book is set in Turkey.
Absolutely. I've traveled extensively there. I have not lived there, but I traveled extensively there and looked at a lot of the geology. Even as a tourist, I'm always looking at the geology, and it's a fascinating place, culturally, historically, geographically, and certainly from my perspective as a geologist, geologically, it's an amazing place.
Why did you leave the field of a practicing geologist and decide to become an author? What was that motivation?
I actually decided to begin writing before I wound up my 30 plus career as a geologist. So I began writing when I was well into my career, and there were a couple of different reasons for that. I think everybody has a story to tell, and some of us, um, well, for me specifically as a geologist, I'd be working in the field, and I started writing in hotel rooms at night. I didn't get my education as a writer traditionally. Working in the field like I wasn't going to be able to get a master of fine arts in creative writing. So I took workshops. I worked with writing coaches. I read voraciously because you can apprentice yourself to great writers. But I wanted to do it. I always loved writing. I wrote very bad poetry as a child, and I loved the earth. I love the geologic processes that shape it, and and I'm an avid reader, and so I wanted to find a way to translate the wonder I feel about the work I was doing and the geology I was seeing, and I wanted to be able to that for non-scientist readers.
One of the things I was intrigued by is that this book starts in Philadelphia, and there's a lot of references to Philadelphia and the vicinity in this book. So, were you a Philadelphian at any time?
I was not. So I'll back up a little bit and give you a little background. The book is loosely based on a period in my late husband's life, and Will is inspired by my late husband. Um, I will qualify that by saying it is fictional. The deeper I got into the story, the more fictional it became. But he did, my late husband did work on the expansion of the Philadelphia port as an engineering geologist, and he did get bored with his desk job doing that, and found a dam in Turkey that had an extremely problematic foundation, incredibly interesting geologically, and he lived in Turkey for 3 years working on that dam, and so that was the inspiration for No More Empty Spaces.
All right. Well, now, before we get into the talking about the book, would you be able to read a segment or a little portion of the book for us to give the followers a little bit of feel for it?
Sure, and the portion I've chosen is has a little geological exercise, so it really exemplifies that little bit of what I want you to understand about what geologists do. So, Will is working on something that we call cross sections from borehole logs, and he's describing what it actually does in this section. As the autumn days cooled and shortened, Will rushed his team to finish drilling the new boreholes throughout the footprint of the dam. Many nights he spread the borehole logs from that day out on the table after dinner and drew cross sections. What are you doing? Paula asked one of those evenings, looking up from grading papers. I'm taking the data from each borehole, which are recorded on these logs, and correlating them from one to the next. Try this, he said. And you can try this, Blaine, and so can your viewers.
Okay.
Put your hands up in front of your eyes, palms out, close together, about an inch apart. Then turn and look again and again and again. Then, from those four narrow views, describe what the whole room looks like. So you're thinking about like a vertical borehole, and you look at one view and one view, and you turn your head, and you're getting a little vertical view of the room. He says, so then from those four narrow views, describe what the whole room looks like. That's what a subsurface investigation is like. Those narrow snapshots are like the boreholes we drill. The cross sections I'm working on are like the description of the room. She did what he said, and one of her bright hazel eyes peeked through the space between her hands as she turned to get the different views. That seems hard, getting the whole picture from just that, she said. It isn't easy, but it's always interesting. We locate the boreholes based on our best understanding of the geology at the surface from the mapping we've done, which you didn't get to do for that exercise. Still, it's a big puzzle we put together, piece by piece by piece. As more boreholes were completed, Will drafted cross-section after cross-section, both parallel and perpendicular to the dam's alignment. He extrapolated what he couldn't see from what he could, reading the story in the rocks, reading between the lines of the story into the empty spaces of those same rocks.
For a while there, I thought you were a movie director there, with the looking around like that. That reminds me of that. Wow. Very good. Wow, that's wonderful. Yeah, it's fascinating. I learned so much in this book. It's friends, if when you read this book is so you learn so much about geology and about Turkey and culture. We're going to get into all that, but I just want to compliment Deb, because I found this outstanding, and I really enjoyed all that I could learn from your book. So yeah. Well, one of the things I noticed is set back in a time period from 1972 to around 1974. Was there a reason you chose that time period as opposed to more future periods?
Yes. So during the late 60s, well, certainly the 60s and 1970s, Americans and Brits were often working all over the world on these huge infrastructure projects, both scientists and engineers, and they would go for long periods of time and live in foreign countries. And later on, more of the students from these same countries got the education they needed so that there wasn't as much of a need for foreigners to come and work on these big projects. And I think certainly most countries would rather um, staff these projects, with the home team if they can. There's not a language problem then, and things like that. So yeah, it's in that time period because that is the time period when many, many Americans and Brits were living all over the world to do this kind of work.
That makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. And yeah, are we still doing a lot of work? I mean, is it mostly native individuals who are doing the work, or are we still sending American, British geological firms? Are they still sending people over to a lot of these foreign countries?
Well, certainly geologists consult all over the world, but I think there's probably less people living on big projects for long periods of time than there used to be. That's my assumption.
Now, when our protagonist, Will Ross, decides he's going to leave in Philadelphia, I don't know if I like that, but he had to for the book. Okay. But I left it too. I'm in South Carolina. So, but when he decided to leave, he goes to Turkey. I gather he was sort of shocked by the layers of supervisors he had to deal with. He had one in New York. He had one, I think, in Ankara. He had another one on the site. He wasn't used to this.
I think he was shocked that that the engineer at the site and that the engineer in Ankara thought they were his boss when he thought he reported directly to the more senior engineer in New York. So he's a pretty headstrong individual. Just I think you can tell that early on in the book from how he landed the job, how he decided to take his children with him, and that has gotten him in trouble in previous times in his life when he pushes back at it. So he does keep his own counsel about that when he gets to Kayakale. But yeah, I think he doesn't want three bosses. Knowing Will, he'd probably rather not have a boss at all. So that's just a little bit about Will.
Okay. Now, this revolves around excuse me if I pronounce it improperly, Kayakale Dam. Is that a
Correct.
fictional dam? And if so, where is it based on a real dam? Where is this located in Turkey?
Kayakale Dam is a fictional dam. But there is a very large series of dams in Eastern Anatolia. It's actually called the Eastern Anatolian Project. There were a series of dams built on both the Tigris and Euphrates rivers during the time period from the 60s through the 80s. And there's a lot of information out in the public domain about those dams. And I decided to write about a fictional dam. It's actually the fictional dam is located about 400 miles east of Ankara, so it's in east central Anatolia in a really rugged, remote, mountainous area. And um, I decided to make it a fictional dam because some of the things that happened to during construction of the real dams are dramatic for an engineering geologist, but perhaps not so much for non-scientists. And so I wanted to make it interesting and dramatic for all my readers, but I want to qualify that by saying the things that happened are all scientifically plausible. So, all the geology that's in the book, all the engineering that's in the book, if it's not real, it's absolutely plausible.
Okay. Now, he comes to the dam construction site. Will gets there and nothing's going on. Everything seems to have ground to a halt. And probably for a pretty long time. Does this happen often?
Oh, certainly, we do, well, as Will said, and I think many geologists have said this, that there's never enough money to do the investigation you want to do before the work starts, but there's always enough money to do the investigation once construction grinds to a halt because you didn't know what was in the subsurface. So, um, yeah. No, yes, it does happen.
Okay. Well, that's because that's fascinating. I never realized that. Wow. Now, he ends up having his 3 children accompany him. Now, I gotta be honest with you. I did some practice of family law. How did he get them out of there? They seem to have been deceived by the whole thing. Who are they? How old are they? Tell us a little bit about the kids.
He has 3 children, 15-year-old Kevin, 12-year-old Rob, and 4-year-old Didi. They all have passports because Will has worked internationally before, and Will holds on to their passports. He is divorced. He and his ex-wife have been divorced about a year. They have shared custody of the children. They have 2 weeks with their mom and 2 weeks with their dad. And Will, when he first took this job, and he didn't know exactly how long it was gonna be. He knew it was gonna be several months, certainly, if not longer. And his plan was to leave the children with their mother during that time period. Well, 2 weeks before he leaves, he's dropping the kids off after his stint of shared custody, and he finds his wife passed out, drunk. And he is considering what to do, and as I said, he's pretty headstrong. He makes the decision to take them with him 2 weeks later, telling them it's for his shared stint of custody, of 2 weeks of shared custody, and he doesn't let them know that they're gonna live there and he's not gonna send them back, and so, yes, it does sound a lot like a kidnapping. The thing that makes it work is that Kat, his ex-wife, is at a place in her life where she's sort of having her second teenage years, and she says, "Well, sure, you can keep them. I'm gonna play for a while."
Yeah, and keep sending the child support and the alimony. You know, yeah, that was in
Right.
there too, right? As long as they get that, they were happy. So yeah, I had one lady who took her children, God knows where in the South Pacific, somewhere west of New Zealand. I don't know where it was. That was quite the quite the effort we had to get it there, but yeah, but the fact he had it for 2 weeks, he could go and do that. And now the kids all have different reactions because Didi is so thrilled. The little girl's happy to be with her dad. Oh, it's the wonderful thing. Not so much with the 2 boys though. They were rather shocked.
Yeah, Kevin has pretty much been the adult in the house when he's with their mother during their 2 weeks with their mother, and so he feels a lot of responsibility, and he's not sure how that's all gonna play out. Rob is the star of his baseball team and little league in Moorestown, New Jersey, and he really doesn't wanna leave. And Rob pretty much really doesn't wanna do anything his dad wants him to do anyway. And Dee Dee, she's a bit of a daddy's girl. She loves to please him, and she loves adventures, and so she's very excited for the adventure they're going to.
So that's wonderful. Now, when they get there, they meet a lady by the name of Paula, who is a teacher. Uh, how does it is this does you see that out in the job sites in foreign countries that their teachers supplied for the students or the kids who are there?
Oh, certainly. Yes, absolutely. And in fact, the curriculum that's talked about in the book is a real curriculum, and it's been in place for a very long time. It's called the Calvert School, and, she was contracted by the Calvert School she was contracted by the Calvert School and the engineering company who wanted these geologists and engineers to work long term in a foreign country, and they weren't gonna leave their families, so they brought their families with them, and someone needed to teach the English speaking children there. So that's how she got there.
Early on, you describe why Turkey is so prone to earthquakes. At least that's the way I gathered the word prone is a good word. But apparently, there are two geological faults that you talk about. There may be more, but at least two going through the country. Tell us a little bit about that and what's going on, because they're always having earthquakes over there.
Yes, there are more than 2 faults, but there are 2 very large faults that are regional on a regional scale, quite like the San Andreas Fault. There's a lot of other faults in California, but the San Andreas Fault is a huge regional scale fault, and those were the 2 faults are similar to that. The North Anatolian Fault, in fact, is very much like the San Andreas. They're both transform faults, and what that means, it means they're moving sideways, not up and down. So their transform faults move like this. The North Anatolian Fault's going like that. The East Anatolian Fault's going the other way. And so what's happening? And so let's say this is Anatolia, and the North Anatolian Fault's up here, and the East Anatolian Fault is here. Well, on a large regional tectonic level, the Arabian plate is down here and it's moving up and it's pushing like this. And so what's happening is Anatolia is moving like that. So it's sort of Anatolia between these two faults is sort of being squeezed like toothpaste out of a tube as the Arabian plate is moving north and pushing up against the southern part of Anatolia. Does I hope that makes sense.
That makes a ton of sense. It explains, again, why there's so many major earthquakes over there in Turkey. It seems like every year they have a major earthquake. And I never understood why that was, but now it's given us a little bit more insight. Like I said, this is a book that taught me a whole heck of a lot. And with your now visualization of that, I even see it better. So thank you so very much. Hey, but you talk about the family and they did trips together. And one of the most fascinating trips early on is their trip. Okay, I got to look at this. Is it called Nemrut Dagi? Is that how you pronounce it?
You pronounce it Nemrut Da.
Nemrut Da. Okay.
Yeah, it's a World Heritage Site. It was built in the 1st century before Common Era BCE, and it was, conceived by a Commagene king by the name of Antiochus the First, and, there's a tumulus at the top, which is quite amazing, even from a very far distance. For those of us who make a habit of reading landscapes, you can tell it's not a natural slope. It just doesn't have the shape of a natural slope. And there's a tumulus at the top. It's actually not 100% clear whether Antiochus is actually buried in that tumulus or not. But there's a tumulus at the top that actually raised the natural elevation of the mountain by 150 feet. It's quite the engineering feat for the time. And on the east and west sides of that tumulus are large temples. There's an altar, many statues, some about human height and some 3, 4, 5 times human height. And and because they're so large, they were done in pieces, and what happened is, as we talked about, Turkey's a very seismically active area, and in earthquakes, many of these statues have fallen down. So there's pieces of these large statues scattered about the 2 altars, the eastern and western temple that are on either side of the tumulus.
How high in terms of feet is this? Is it a small mountain, a large mountain? How high was that?
Well, it's a large mountain. It's quite high in elevation. My recollection, and this is my recollection. Please don't. I could look it up later, but I believe it's 7 or 8,000 feet high, and then at the top of the mountain is this tumulus.
Well, that took a heck of a workforce to put that together, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It would have been astounding. Yeah, it would have been because they would have hand chipped the limestone that they built the tumulus from. And it would have been on the side of the mountain. You climb over the rocks they used to build the tumulus on your way to the top of the mountain, but still just so the limestone chunks that the tumulus made of are about fist size, and they stack them at this to build a artificial peak 150 feet high is quite amazing.
Well, I'll tell you what, I went to, I did a search, I looked that up, and I was flabbergasted. I was amazed at not just the size, but the intricacy of the carvings. It was tremendous. As a matter of fact, when we're done, I'm gonna tell my producer, to maybe put a link to that, Namrut Da, because I think people will be interested in seeing this because that's really fascinating. Again, this is cultural stuff we don't know about here. It's Turkey's sort of been, the last 10, 15 years sort of shutting down to us, and we don't get there that much and learn that much about it. So, yeah, it's fascinating. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Wow. Now, you know, Kevin, as you said, we're going to the family now a little because it's not a book just about the building of a dam. It's also a book about the family. And Kevin has some real uh gets upset with his mother. He gets so upset at one point he writes this utterly angry, really angry letter to his mother. Wow. Tell us a bit about that, could you?
First of all, teenagers are angry a lot. And usually specifically at their parents. But I think in this case, Kevin, at that time in the book, is being confronted with some issues that brought up for him things that took place during the summer before they left for Turkey. And he let it rip on the page. And as you said, Kevin, he's got this anger about things that happened, but he's also, I think, a really sweet young man and a really thoughtful young man and a really kind young man. And so even though he felt this anger um, about things that had happened, he knew not to send that letter. He knew that that was about, getting his anger out, but that it wouldn't serve the family for him to send that letter.
Very true. Very true. Matter of fact, I think what he was most of the book he was doing photography work, if I'm not mistaken. He loved photographing, and then he got involved in some archaeological digs, if I'm not mistaken.
He did. He's a really bright and creative young man, and he has a camera. He got his camera when he was 12 years old, and he's been learning to take pictures. He and his father have that in common. They actually built a little dark room in their little house, and he loves to develop pictures. And he's learning to draw and sketch, and yes, there's archaeological work going on around the dam site because there are ruins that are going to be inundated when the reservoir starts being impounded. And Paula, the teacher, made some connections with the researchers, and Kevin got to work as an intern at one of those sites. So he's a really engaged, interesting young man, and as I wrote him, I really fell in love with him.
Nice kid. I really liked him a lot. Now, you talked about boreholes and having to do filling of boreholes, and I gather no one do that before Will showed up, or what were the problems? And do you usually drill boreholes and fill them? And the whole process I'm a little unfamiliar with.
Well, I'm we don't fill boreholes, we drill boreholes to get the core out to understand what the subsurface geology is. And yes, there had been some drilling work, not as extensive as it should have been, but there's definitely a process we go through as geologists. The first thing we do is we map the surface so that we have an understanding of what the surface geology is. And based on that, we plan as best we can to drill boreholes, a series of boreholes, and do those cross sections like I read about to get the most information that we can and the best information that we can about the subsurface. Because we don't have X-ray vision. If we had X-ray vision, we wouldn't need drill rigs, but we don't have that. So, yeah, the description of the type of investigation that was done after Will got there is very real about what applied geologists do. And that was part of what I wanted to do. I wanted for interested readers to have more of an understanding of what applied scientists do, what engineering geologists do, why the foundations we build on are so important, and how we have to understand them before we start building things.
Ah, well, like I said, you taught us a lot. You really did. Now, on the other side, where the archaeological dig was going on, that area is going to be inundated with water. There were problems that also. What could you explain what some of those problems were?
There are actually a few different problems that were found throughout the book, and that's indicative of things that do happen when you impound a large reservoir. I don't know if you can imagine this, but think about how heavy water is. Just a gallon of water is more than 8 pounds. And think about impounding hundreds of millions of gallons of water and the weight of it and so these areas behind the dam, these valleys, which have had walls that have been open to the air for millions of years, all of a sudden have hundreds of thousands of millions of gallons of water against them. The hydrostatic pressures are huge. And so things can happen when you saturate materials that haven't ever been saturated like that with a lot of weight on them. And in fact, um, one of the things that we know about is that there is reservoir induced seismicity. So reservoirs can cause earthquakes, um, small earthquakes, not on the scale that you'd see from, say, the North Anatolian Fault or the East Anatolian Fault, which are regional size faults. But the weight of the water in these valleys that hasn't been there before can induce earthquakes. It can make for slope instability of the slopes on the sides of the reservoir, and it also puts a lot of pressure on the base of the river valley, which has had a river running through it, but it has not had a huge lake sitting on it. And so all of those things can cause geologic hazards to happen that haven't moved before.
Wow, I don't think I want to go out to visit the Hoover Dam after this. Is that pretty stable? I mean, I guess the same thing happened out there. They had to do all that testing and everything, but it makes you wonder about that.
That's why you do good geotechnical investigations, good geological and geotechnical investigations before you build these huge projects.
People don't realize this. They don't. And one of the things I think that amazed me was that Will uh, wanted to get up in an airplane to over get an overview of the entire project. And even after he got there, they wouldn't let him have a plane. They did not. He asked, "Could I have a plane?" Nope, that you're not allowed to have a plane. Again, I'm showing my stupidity here, but I don't mind. What will an overview, a flight overview, what will that do to help a geologist or the engineering firm make sure the dam is constructed in the proper way?
For me, I think the best geologists start with a really big picture and then work their way down into the details. So, having an overview, like an overflight, the best geologists read the landscape. And so a flight over giving gives you that. And a lot of the way we start investigations is by using aerial photos, and now back in the old days it was just aerial photos. Now we use other types of remote sensing. LiDAR specifically has been an amazing tool that has opened up landscape analysis, basically on your computer screen, and it's quite amazing. But having that big picture and then working your way in, and just an example of that on a small scale would be on a geology field trip, all the students pile out of the van and usually run right up to the outcrop and start looking for fossils or small things, depending upon where you are and what you're looking for. And if you're teaching them, I always try and tell them, pile out of the van, stand back, look at the big picture first. Get a sense of what the geology of that area is, that unit is from standing back, and then work your way in and look at the details. And that's what I was trying to translate about how we do geologic investigations.
And this is something which obviously this is a fictional book, but as I read this, I kept thinking, did they place the dam at the wrong location? There seemed to be a lot of problems, and and I don't know why. It just seemed like it might not be the best spot for it.
That's a really good point, and that's true, and they chose that location because there were 2 rivers that came together. They 2 rivers, there was a confluence upstream of where that dam was placed. And so by putting the dam where it was, they got a much larger reservoir. A larger reservoir means you can make more power because you have a, a bigger pool to draw from. So that's why they chose that. But it's true that they picked an area with a lot of problematic geology. And if more work had been done early in the geologic investigation, they might have relocated the dam itself to have a better foundation. But they were so far along by the time they discovered the problems, they decided to work on fixing the problems in the foundation rather than relocating the dam itself.
I can understand that. Now, one of the heroes in the book is Buddy. Who's Buddy? I enjoyed Buddy. Tell us about Buddy.
I love Buddy too. Buddy, when at the beginning of the book, is a big, gangly legged stray puppy that Kevin finds the very first day that the Ross family is in Kayakale. And he's an Anatolian shepherd puppy. He grows up to be very big. Um, and uh, Anatolian shepherds can be quite fierce in protecting their flocks, and there is no doubt in my mind that Buddy would do anything to protect the flock that he loves, which is the Ross family. And he's featured quite prominently in the book on Kevin's adventures. Kevin is one of the main characters, and Buddy spends a lot of time with him, and Buddy's a lovely dog, and yes,
And
a beloved dog,
like all dogs, he wants to sleep in bed with everybody too. He gets into
yes,
bed and
yes,
takes up the
yep,
whole room,
yep, and he's big. By the time he grows up, I don't think there's much room for Kevin in their little single bed.
My Cavalier King Charles takes up half my bed, and I can't figure out how he does that. But boy, when he decides to stretch out, just forget it. Just move over or get out of bed. Okay. Now, if you had to categorize this book, would you say this is a geology book? Is it a family book? Is it a romance? A drama? How where do you place this in the genres of literature?
Well, first I'm gonna just say yes, it's all those things that you mentioned, and I think maybe that's it was a little hard to find a publisher because no one knew what box to put it in exactly. So I think it's part travel story, part adventure, part family story. There's science woven throughout the book, which I think there are several wonderful novels that have that as well. Prodigal Summer by Barbara Kingsolver has conservation biology woven through the book really quite beautifully. Um, Climate science is woven through Charlotte McConaughey's book Migrations, and I'd be presumptuous to put myself in those authors' categories, but I can aspire to that.
No, that's okay. The title. Where did it come from? No more empty spaces. Where did we get that title from? And was that your working title?
No, it was not my working title, and I really think that finding the title was the very best of how a writer and a publisher can work together. So the working title was Inundation, and I knew there were issues with that, but I just hadn't thought of something better, and the publisher and I had a conversation. She was actually very kind and said, "What do you think? Would you be willing to retitle the book?" And I said, "Yes, I know we need to, but I just haven't found the right words." And one of her staff, an assistant editor, read the book specifically for titling, came up with a list of potential titles, and she didn't number them or anything, but right at the top of the list was No More Empty Spaces. Turned out it was her favorite, and the moment I read it, I was like, that's it. That's perfect. And so I think it was, a really lovely example of how a publisher and a writer can work together in a really positive way.
Yeah. Great. Very great experience to tell us about that. You know, one of the last questions I have here for you is Kevin. We talked about him writing about his mother who was going through her teen years again. It just seems like, am I gathering that this drinking and high school attitude is pretty much in the United States? Do you see that in foreign countries? They have a similar attitude towards being a teenager, or do they mature earlier? I don't know. I just got the feeling that he was appalled when he saw what his mother was going through, and maybe it's different in other countries.
I don't think I can speak to that because I've never lived long term in another culture to observe it myself. But I think that all teenagers have some level of contempt for their parents. And in this case, what I can say is that Kevin, in this case, what I was trying to do as a writer was I wasn't making a bigger statement. I was simply trying to express how this boy felt about a really difficult situation he had been put in. And I know that when you get the book out in the world as a writer, you have to let readers make whatever meaning of it that they're going to, and I hope that readers will make whatever meaning of this book they need to. But specifically about that, I was just simply writing about Kevin's difficult situation.
Because my wife's from Romania, and obviously we keep very close with the family over there, and nothing like what we're describing here. Nothing. And I see this other place. Now, my Italian side, maybe that's different. Okay. They like to drink their wine. But the bottom line is, I just think we have this high school mentality that just keeps with us on and on and on. Give it up, folks. Let's get into the world. Let's start doing something. And but anyway, that's how I felt, and that's how I took it. And like you said, everybody can take it a different way.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly do think we have kind of a youth obsessed culture here in the US. I think that's true. We do have that, and that and certainly Will's ex-wife was concerned about losing her youth and was trying to relive her youth in that time period, and that made it really difficult for her children.
It does. It does. Well, now tell me, what's next for DJ Deb Green? What's coming up? We have another book coming up, or are you going back into the geology field? What are you going to do?
I do have another book that I'm working on. I'm working on my second novel. Its working titles is Chances, and the very short description is Chances is the story of a woman taking the helm of her life as she learns to command the helm of her sailboat.
Oh, okay. And for those of you, when you read the book, there's a sailbook or there's a boat in there too. So I like that. Yeah, very good tie-in. We can't get into a lot of the plots here, but I'll tell you what, it's a very interesting book. It's a very good book. And I get the feeling by the end the dam will be built. Okay. I get the feeling they're going to be bringing power and electricity and everything that part of the world. But very well done. Boy, it's just I can't tell you how much fun I had with this. So I don't want to take any more of your time. You're talking oh my God, it's almost been an hour, Deb, almost an hour. And you've been delightful. Thank you so much for coming on, taking time for us. And again, thanks for being on Books and Looks.
Thanks, Blaine. I appreciate it. I hope your readers will be interested and pick up a copy of the book. And if I'm touring for author events right now. They can go to my website and look at the news and events page to see where I'm going to be. I'd love to meet some of them. And the website is www.geologistwriter.com.
Well, very good. Very good. I tell you what, I think it's just people will learn a whole heck of a lot and enjoy this book so very, very much. I hope you had as much fun listening to Deb as I did. I learned so much. I'm telling you, boy, it's amazing how much I learned reading some of these books out there. And I'm so happy that she was on to tell us about geology. She's our second geologist to come on this year. And I don't know, I'm finding all the geology books. So I'm very, very happy to have her here. I hope you enjoyed her as much as I enjoyed chatting with her. So what am I looking at? You know what? I'm looking at a resolution I made 30 years ago. 30 years ago. Yeah, I made a New Year's resolution. That resolution was use more change. That's right. You go out, you pay for things with cash, and you get change. And I used to get piles and piles of change. Now, we don't get it as much nowadays. But I'm looking at this resolution, use more change. I never forget that year. I mean, I was always digging into my pocket, getting out of the exact change or close to the exact change. If I could change maybe 5 coins and get 1 coin back, that's great. Okay, so that was my resolution. You say, why? Why are you looking at that now? Because did you know that last year, Americans lost $68 million worth of coins? That's correct. $68 million worth of coins were lost and have found their way into landfills. And there are companies out there that know how to get these coins, and they're getting the coins and they're getting the money. One company made $10 million last year resurrecting old coins from within the past year. We waste so much money. And I know change is a pain, isn't it? I think that's why people are using more and more credit cards, because nobody wants to carry around all this change, but it's out there. It's units of currency, okay? And we just seem to discard it. It gets stuck here, it gets thrown in here. How do you throw away that much money? $68 million was thrown away last year. It's an amazing, amazing number. But anyway, that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at that resolution I made 30 years ago. Hey, do the same thing. It might be April, but you can still make a resolution. Use more change. That's right. Don't let some company get it in the landfill or recycling area. Okay. You use more change. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. On behalf of viewsonbooks.com, on behalf of my good friends at Podcast Studio X, this is Blaine DeSantis saying, may all your leaves be pages in a book.